Rebel Force Radio presents
Star Wars Cantina.
Where are you going, Master?
For a drink.
Sorry about the mess.
You will never find a more wretched hive of scum and villainy. We must be cautious.
How you doing, Anthony?
I'm doing just great.
Of course, welcome to Chicago.
Thank you. It's not my first time, but it's the first time the weather's been, brilliant enough to walk around and have a good time.
Fall in Chicago is often the best time of year around here. It's the best weather we have, and we take advantage of it as much as we can, because if you live here, I mean, you're from England.
Yeah, so but I watch ER. I know what the weather does here. You know, they're always out in snowstorms or rain. It's a bit of drama.
Right. It's amazing how they can make the snow in Chicago look so realistic as they're filming it in L.A.
Is that right?
Yeah. Well,
you just destroyed it. I thought it was real.
In all
just
honesty,
like Star Wars movies.
They do shoot a lot of exteriors around here. Like you'll notice on the Michigan Avenue Bridge, they have a few favorite spots where they like to shoot certain scenes. Of course, these spots are nowhere near an actual hospital.
Well, you know, I've worked a lot on Tatooine, and I've never been to Dagobah, but we have the same problems in Star Wars, I think.
You are here for the grand opening of Star Wars, Where Science Meets Imagination, at the Chicago Museum of Science and Industry. Before I get to my many questions about C-3PO, what can you tell us about this exhibit?
It's an exhibit that was created by the Boston Museum of Science, I think a couple of years ago, and I was very lucky to be asked to be involved, partly as myself, partly as C-3PO, writing and filming for elements of the exhibit and for the wonderful, magnificent book that actually accompanies the whole show. And it's been to a few places in America, and what the show is about, what the exhibit is about, is it takes the idea of Star Wars, which everybody knows about, and the kinds of science that's in there, whether it's a harvest speeder or it's why people live underground or it's robots, various elements like this. And it says, okay, so this George did this with magic and ILM. How might we do it on Earth? And you get to play. You get to try and make a robot that actually has some kind of function. There's even a pair of robot legs. It sounds a little weird, but it's on a mechanical frame, and you have to get them to walk. You know, 1 foot and toe and heel and whatever in front. It's amazingly difficult. I thought, oh, that looks easy. I was like half an hour until I got quite cross with it. And you get to play with little magnet trains and so on. Huge amount of fun with the idea of helping people to be interested in science as well as be amused. Also in the exhibit, you've got everything there is real from the movies, whether it's a model that was used to put into the computer, or it's Darth Vader's costume, or it's one of my costumes, including the puppet one from Episode 1. And original drawings, artwork, everything's real, and you will have seen them for a few seconds on screen. Now you can stand in front of a showcase and just stare.
Yes, get a nice close-up look at these iconic images. Yeah. You can see them in 3D. Walk around them, check them out. And it sounds like this exhibit is fully interactive.
Huge amounts of interactive, which is kind of important, because in a movie you can only interact with your emotions, if you like, being pulled along by what you see and what you hear, the music particularly. Here you can actually stand there and think and consider and participate. It's hugely interactive. In fact, I get into trouble. I miss meetings because I'm trying to finish playing with something. You know, there's one amazing thing. There were 3 or 4 tables which look completely simple, and you pick up a card which has like a logo on it, and you hold it above the table, and suddenly in your hand you're, for instance, holding a moisture farm or a sand crawler, and you put it on the table, and gradually on the computer screen it's invisible in front of you, but you are actually lifting and putting down and placing and arranging so that it all works as a moisture farm. I have no idea how it works. It's really good.
Now let's talk about C-3PO.
Yeah, because he hates to be left out for too long.
One of the most, and I always use this when I talk about Star Wars, iconic character. And from the saga, probably one of the most iconic characters.
Well, he's a figure that you instantly recognize, and it's a figure that kind of haunts me around the world, just as the music does. And, you know, even this morning, lying in bed, I flick on the HBO, and there's episode 3, and yesterday it was episode 2. I mean, is there something I don't know about? Is it just in my room or what? And it has followed me around the world, literally, in some form or another.
because the appeal is so worldwide and universal.
Yes.
And it's that kind of connection that must just be rewarding to you.
It is, and especially as we speak, the 30th year of Star Wars has shown me in huge numbers, because I've been at some very, very large events, the collective affection that goes towards these movies.
Yes.
And it's grand to be a part of it.
And you've been a part of it for 30 years. You're one of the few people who has actually been on board the Star Wars saga from the beginning.
I'm the only person to be in all 6 movies, which, given that I didn't want to be in the first one, is kind of odd. But literally, I'm the only actor to be involved.
Well, let's talk about how you got involved and what did the role of the art of Ralph McQuarrie have to do with you deciding to become C-3PO?
One of the things I like in the exhibition here at the museum is that there is part of Ralph McQuarrie's painting enlarged by the side of the showcase that has Threepio and R2-D2 in it. And there was, people know, I think a lot of fans know that I wasn't particularly keen on science fiction. I certainly didn't want to be in a low-budget sci-fi movie in a robot suit. And my agent made me go and meet basically an unknown American in England at that time. And there was George, very quiet, very kind of reserved, silent. But there was Ralph McQuarrie's painting on the wall, and somehow the face of the character in the painting spoke to me, just looked at me and pulled me towards him and sort of, I don't know, I can't explain it. I should, after all these years, have a sort of very simple, neat phrase but I don't, because I am still confused as to why it worked. And then reading the script, the only character I really liked was this kind of oddball person who was very unhappy all the time. And, a lot of us spend our lives out of our natural habitat, or we're a little uncomfortable, whether it's in our job or the way we commute or whatever. And Threepio sort of epitomizes a fish out of water at all times.
Yes.
And then, the next day I went back and said to George, after another hour together, kind of ran out of things to say. I said, "Can I play the part?" And he said, "Sure." and there we are. And the next day is when all the horror started, because the next day I was at Elstree Studios being slapped all over with wet plaster to make a model of my body.
Wow.
And until you've seen yourself standing there in every detail, with no clothes on, in white plaster, you don't realize how unappealing the human body can look.
I can only imagine.
Don't imagine too much.
What was it like to work with George Lucas?
He's well known for being slightly remote as a director. So, he's got the whole thing. I think as far, I can't think of another director who has to have so much in his imagination, because so much is added, even then, is added after the fact. So all the time he's trying to knit what he's seeing on the screen with what he knows ILM will do and can do and need to do. So he doesn't always have time to explain things to the people actually standing there. So I not taking anything away or giving myself anything, I got into the habit of kind of working it out for myself, how to do things. And it was a bit like being a grown-up infant, because in that costume I had to work out how to pick something up, how to see something without being able to see it before I looked at it. We all work on about 175, 180 degrees of peripheral vision. Looking straight forward, you can see either side. With him, I'm like a horse with blinkers, and I'd better know where the object I need to look at is, because I don't have time to. It would be playing a blind man if I didn't work it out in advance.
Since you've been working with George for so long and you returned for the prequels, did you find that maybe he could just sort of very simply, in very few words, tell you what he was looking for, and you knew?
Yes,
because of the experience?
It was the way he said, "Stand there."
Yeah, that's the extent of his direction?
Yes.
Stand there.
Yes, or just a little over to the right.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
But I would have these marks. In a movie, I don't know if people know, but you generally find out where to stand, because there's a thing on the floor, and it can be a tiny bit of blue tape or something. Or it can be, in my case, a sandbag, or latterly they gave me these wonderful T-shaped things. You put your feet either side of the central bit, and mine were gold. They're bright, shiny gold tape marks, and a really nice souvenir there. And you work out, you sort of back up, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, and you should be on your mark, because it's very important how things are lined up in a movie. So, he was worried about blue screen and, what Padme looked like or whatever, because you see the face, you see the hair and the makeup. So
you mentioned the mark was a nice souvenir. Is this something you took from the set with you?
Oh, dear. Anyway, Well, it's nice to have the odd souvenir, isn't it?
Right, and
they were my marks. Nobody else was gold on the set.
Exactly. And is there anything else, a set piece or prop that might be in a drawer at your house?
Yeah, probably in a cupboard.
Yeah. You want to reveal what it is?
Not at this moment.
Okay, but it's small enough to fit in a cupboard, though.
Perhaps when I leave the country. I do actually have, and I've never done anything with it, 6 fragments of the Millennium Falcon, the last ones on the planet, because one day I was walking on the back lot at Elstree trying to calm down, and it was a very kind of drizzly day, I remember, and there was this bonfire, smelly. You wouldn't be allowed to do it now. And they were burning the Millennium Falcon.
Oh, my God.
I was genuinely shocked. I'm still shocked. And I sort of questioned them about it. The interior was made of steel, and that went back to, got melted down for scrap. But the exterior was all plywood and bits of plastic and stuff. And they were literally burning it. And because they explained, you can't store this stuff. It was so huge. Right. It would cost a fortune to store it. And you had to get rid of it. And I picked up a few bits of sort of plastic and stuff because, I don't know, I felt somebody should have something. It shouldn't just disappear. Right. It shouldn't just exist. In fact, you can see the model of it, which was used in the trick shots and the ILM stuff in the Science and Imagination exhibit. A beautiful, beautiful, beautiful model. In such detail. In fact, you get it's in quite a small showcase so that you can actually put your nose on it and gaze at the detail that's there, created by the ILM modelers. The big version, had it all big size. But the reason the model shots work so well is that the camera can get right in there, right up close, and there is the detail there. So, yes, I don't know where those bits are, actually. It's upstairs somewhere. Because if you came to my home, it sounds weird, but there isn't a single Star Wars artifact on show.
Really?
Yeah.
Now, that surprises me because Star Wars collecting has become such a huge hobby. I was going to ask you, do you have any Threepio memorabilia or collectibles?
Yes, I do. Quite a lot, but they're not on the show. I mean, I don't know. It would be a bit like people who know what I do know what I do. They don't need to, have it thrust in their face at all times. And people who don't know don't need to know. Mm-hmm. My home's slightly more sort of, antique orientated, I suppose.
There you go. Do you live in an old house?
Yes, I do live in an old house. I live in 2 old houses, one in France, one in England. And the English one's about, as we speak, about 200 years old.
What's the oddest C-3PO collectible you've ever seen?
Well, the one that really gives me is a Scotch tape dispenser, which is made of ceramic, and it's white and yellowy colour. And it is Threepio lying somewhat prone with his knees in the air, lying back on his elbows.
Oh, okay.
With his legs apart and stuffed between his thighs. It's a roll of Scotch tape. And I did say, well, are you going to make a toilet paper dispenser that's, in the reverse position? I just thought it was so tacky. And in fact, for a while, it was the one thing on my desk. And then the joke had got old.
Well, I've developed some imagery in my head that's very disturbing. So we'll
Absolutely,
just...
and it was made by a company called Taste Setters, believe it or not. But I am amazed that people collect so much stuff, and I don't know. I'm a little disturbed when I go into... I was going around a show house with a friend who was wanting to buy, a home for sale, and I was very disturbed to see there was a lightsaber in the sitting room. I said, I don't think you need to buy this house. Weird people. So I don't know why you would want a lightsaber. But well, they now work very well. They do all the noises and stuff.
Yes, it's
I think
far
I just
cry.
miffed. Yeah, Threepio never got a lightsaber, so I think he's a little jealous.
Again, something that would be probably difficult for you to hold on to. Is it true that when you had to use a prop, they would tape it or tie it onto you?
Yeah, that's absolutely right. Holding things was difficult. The first thing I probably ever picked up was the little communication device, little white transmitter that was lying on a surface, and Threepio very neatly picks it up and it starts communicating with Luke Skywalker. And of course it was there, and then we go into a close-up, and I just had the arm on, moved it into shot, plonked my hand down on top of the thing, because you can't see, but in the palm of my hand is some double back sticky tape, and so I just sort of clomped onto it and then put my fingers around it. And then in the long shot, yes, it is taped. The biggest thing they taped onto me was a scene, and I think episode 2 was it, where Threepio gets his head blown off, and for the first time I got a blaster, because Threepio's always secretly had a desire to have a blaster in his hands. And we did actually have to wire that in because I couldn't grip the whole thing. That was a really, really fun thing to shoot, to pretend to be like...
Yeah.
I won't tell you the line I said. The line you hear is die, Jedi dogs.
Yes.
I said Threepio got very, very naughty in that scene and said some very bad words. I won't even tell you what they started with. But the crew just collapsed in laughter because they'd never heard Threepio use bad language before. But, Threepio's got a lot of pent-up tension there, and that's one reason people use...
I picked up on that. I picked up...
Why is that? Something in the performance?
Threepio seems to be very wound up.
Oh, totally. He's in the wrong place. He's protocol and etiquette. The first thing he hears from his little potential droid friend is his parts are showing. He's naked. Thanks, Artoo. That's really... I needed to know that. So he spends, the first 20 years of the movie stark naked in front of people when he's been trying to be the head waiter. Imagine walking into a restaurant and finding the head waiter has no clothes on, How would he feel? How would you feel? Anyway, where are we going tonight for dinner? I forget. So Threepio is a little traumatized by that. Protocol and etiquette are not things that are generally apparent in George's universes. If you think back, he has people running around blasting this, that, and that, and being generally discourteous to Threepio. So he's unappreciated.
Right. You really pick up on that with the relationship between Threepio and Artoo. And to me, it was not just the character of C-3PO you brought to life, but you also brought to life the character of Artoo because of the way the interaction was there.
Thank you for saying that. I don't think most people realize that Artoo is like working with a cereal packet, a box. Just there is nothing coming back. There's no sounds, no words, nothing. Mm-hmm. And in fact, I'm just heading off. I am a tutor, if you like, a visiting scholar at Carnegie Mellon University. And next week I'll be working with students, and they've asked me suddenly to take an improv class. And Jan Crocker, who created the Science and Star Wars exhibit at Boston, has all sorts of arts background. She said, well, you want a subject for improv? You were improvising with Threepio all the time, with R2-D2 all the time. And I thought, yes, I was, wasn't I? Yes, and it drove me nuts. In the end, after 6 movies, you get used to it. Although in the last movie, usually Artoo wasn't there at all. It was just... And in fact, this morning on TV, I watched a scene, and I convinced myself watching that Artoo was there. And of course he wasn't. He was digitally put on later on by ILM. And I was quite amused to see that it really does work, thanks to ILM. But, thank you, yes, I was creating 2 characters.
An incident when this really became apparent to me was I was in the attendance at Star Wars Celebration 2. You were hosting a panel with Don Bees, and Artoo was on stage. And you were taking questions from the crowd. Oh, wow, yes. For Artoo. And you brought so much life to Artoo that sitting there in the audience, I believed you were actually translating for the audience what he was saying. And as a matter of fact, I actually asked the question. I asked, what was it like being upstaged by Luke Skywalker in the films? And I actually have a clip of that if you'd like to hear it.
You asked Artoo what it was like being upstaged?
Yes, I'll play it for you right now. Here it is.
Artoo, tell me, are you upset that George Lucas based the Star Wars movies on the character of Luke Skywalker and not a great as yourself?
Sorry, he didn't quite understand the question. Can you repeat it?
The movie Star Wars. More Luke Skywalker, not as much Artoo. Don't you think
Yeah, no, he's kind of upset, as many people are. What do you mean I had more lines than you? Of course I did. No, but people understand me, Artoo. Oh, Artoo? Well, where are you going? Well, what makes you think there's a settlement over there? Have you got a hangover, Artoo? Because you seem a little queasy today.
There you have it.
That is, you've really made me smile there. I've never heard that before. That was genuine improvisation, and the difference is, there I was on stage, and I just had this idea, why not make my life even more dangerous? And so they had on a soundboard a series of R2 sounds, and somebody was hitting a button like on a keyboard. And I had no idea, so I asked a question, or got an audience member to ask a question, and then they would make random sounds on Artoo's trick, whatever. And I would have to think the answer to the question and what was the sound, because they were totally random. I didn't know what they were going to come up with. And then make a reply. And that was real improvisation, what you
Absolutely.
just heard. So can I do this at Carnegie Mellon? I don't know. Is Artoo there? I don't know. But the difference was, on stage, we did put his sounds in live, whereas in reality, of course, they were put on months later by Ben Burtt. And the other day, I was in Skywalker Ranch in his office, and there was the original keyboard that he'd made the whistles and beeps on. But then, of course, the reason that you partly believe in Artoo is the humanity that Ben Burtt brings with his own voice, going or whistling or whatever. And then I think he had his little baby girl make some sort of infant sounds, and they give you a sense of sort of humanity of carbon-based, as opposed to silicon-based metal and whatever. Maybe does metal have carbon in it? I don't know. But there is an animal humanity in Artoo, and of course very carefully with the editing too. Yeah,
it was always the most amazing sound, and also among the first that Ben actually created for the film. Of course, Ben Burtt, me being an audio guy, he is legendary status as far as I'm concerned. And what I always liked about Artoo is how he brought organic and mechanical, and somehow just made it bond together.
And that was Ben who did that, because who else would have thought of putting in human sounds? Most robots of that type would have just a beeps and all that kind of thing. The other amusing thing is that Ben also created, every time Threepio moves, and I don't know if you watch this, he moves his neck, he moves his head, or he moves an arm, or he walks, zip, 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 zip. And some poor person in Ben's department has had to sit there watching every frame to see when I move and put it on. It gives a great sense of reality. On the set, the reality is it's sort of, clomp, clomp, clomp. And if everybody's voice is replaced. Every sound is put on specially by Ben. And I just saw episode, or whatever it is, where he, episode 2, I think, where he throws some acoustic bombs. And there Ben does a remarkable thing, terribly brave, and in fact it worried studio managers, because just before the bomb, the sound drops out for just about a second, total silence.
Yes.
Which, the magic of that is it gives a greater impact to the sound that follows, because you have this sort of sucked-in feeling that it's sucked all the sound out of the world, and then and a lot of theaters didn't realize that was an intentional thing. They thought there was a stupid people gap in the tape.
Yeah, well, it was
so Ben was
genius.
a magic person. He came up with Darth Vader's breathing, the lightsabers. Every sound, every acoustic, every interior is Ben.
And you mentioned the gears of Threepio moving around.
Servo motors.
Servo motors, exactly.
And then we had hysterical time together making the Ewok. We had such fun with that. We wrote down, listened to tapes and wrote down all sorts of silly words and then put them in a different order. And we had to throw one or two out because they suddenly started sounding obscene.
Yes, I can imagine.
I wanted to keep them, but he said, no, it's a children's movie.
And you love Ewoks, of course.
Adore them.
Yes.
Absolutely. Any rumors to the contrary, absolutely untrue.
For some reason, I just don't feel convinced about that. I just.
Well, how can I put it? I love it. No, it's difficult, isn't it? Believe. I love it. No, it doesn't work. No, you're right. I found them a little intense. Kind of things that are persistently sort of knee high are. They can get on your nerves after a while.
You don't like it warm and fuzzy, do you? Did you do any of your own stunts dressed in the Threepio outfit?
Yes, I very stupidly. I wanted to do the original one where Threepio falls backwards as the sand person hits Luke Skywalker. And they said, no, you can't, because you're the only person, you're the only... we're out in the desert, and you're you, and we haven't got another you.
Right.
So I think it was Joe, who was in the props department, who was quite small also, and he sort of vaguely was wearing the costume and fell backwards about, I suppose, 70 degrees onto a mattress. And I did think, and I said, well, I could have done that. No big deal. It was a fall backwards onto cushions. So later on, there's a scene in the Millennium Falcon with Threepio walking towards camera as they're being attacked by TIE fighters, I think. And they said, well, You want to do a stunt? And so I had, you can't tell, but around my waist is a belt, and attached very firmly to the belt is a wire hoop and a wire, which was actually running along the side of the floor, and that got gathered up as I walked forward. Between me and the camera, at a certain point, was the explosion, and the wire went through a hole in the Millennium Falcon wall, and behind that, on pulleys and things to make it, big deal, was two stunt people, big guys. And at the explosion, they pulled really hard, and quite forcibly I smacked into the wall. I mean, with quite a lot of force. And, they stopped filming and ran towards me, but, the costume was fine.
And you, inside?
Oh, I don't think they worried about that.
No.
Just the costume.
Okay. As long as the costume's okay.
Absolutely. It was a very, very expensive costume. And it was always going wrong. Gee, bits used to fall off all the time. The famous scene where I interrupt Han Solo kissing Princess Leia. So many names in these movies. Putting my right arm out. And sir, at that moment, I heard something clank onto the floor, and thought, God, we have to do this again. Reshooting scenes is tiresome. And what I hadn't realized, of course, you don't use the sound at all, so you wouldn't hear the clank. But what fell off was a little arm greebly, a greebly as we know. No, you work out what a greebly is. It was a word we made up. But a greebly fell on the floor, and it was small enough that you only see it if you go frame by frame by frame. You will see from the middle of my arm a goldy thing sort of dropping off. So from then on, I think I let people do stunts for me, and of course mostly now they're done on computer. Stunt people are very... a famous stunt is falling off Jabba's barge, where I went right up to the edge, and we're 60 foot up in the air there on the out in Yuma, and I stood there with my arms off going and cut, and what was dangerous was Artoo. Dumbies is wonderful, but I had one eye out, so I couldn't really see that well. There had to be the open space because you needed the break and the barrier there to fall over. And Artoo is usually fair. Even with Don, he can have his off moments, and I really didn't want to fall over this thing. And then I went away, and Tracy, the stunt double, was dressed up in a rubber costume like mine, and I showed her how I'd been standing, and she copied that, and on action she fell forward and reversed and fell onto a pile of mattresses and cardboard boxes. Then, of course, she came back up again, got dressed up in Carrie Fisher's truss, whatever that costume was, a slave girl thing, and swung across onto the bar, onto the little skiff as Carrie Fisher. So, I hope she was making a lot of money there.
Wow. Yeah.
Talented girl, Threepio and the princess in one day.
Multitasking. Now, you talk about working in Yuma in the desert there. That couldn't nearly have been the experience of working in Tunisia. Now, the good and bad.
You could drink the water in Yuma. I think it's probably the only good thing. I'm sorry. Yuma's, I'm sure it's changed now. I'm sure it's become the mecca of the film industry. They're probably running tours to this is the place where Jabba's barge was. But as a place to stay, the Stardust Motel isn't high on my must-return list.
No, huh?
And, I'm not big on fast food, hot dogs, burgers, stuff.
And you have to fit into the
And I had to fit
costume.
into the thing, yeah. The desert was just beautiful, and actually as beautiful as the Sahara in many ways. Getting out there early in the morning with the low sun, catching those rippling coruscations in the sand was magic, slightly blown by the fact that, the hill next to the set was covered in bikers who used it permanently, so they'd be roaring up and down all the time. That was a bit... Well, I didn't mind. It gave us something to watch. Filming can be a little boring after a while. You kind of run out of things to eat, to read, to what to listen to. You just think, I just don't want to work and go home.
Right, and there's a lot of sitting around time.
A lot of sitting around. The trick is to be ready when, I used to complain on the first film. Well, finally I complained, saying, how come I get here, 8 o'clock in the morning, and we start doing my scenes at, 5 o'clock in the afternoon, I'm sitting around this. Well, yes. Well, the reason is, Carrie and Mark get to look a bit tired by the end of the day. So it's better we shoot them in the morning when they look fresh and everything. I say, well, you know what? I'm kind of tired by the end of the day. Yeah, but nobody can see you. Oh, thank you. And then they said, well, actually, what we call the sunset, the golden hour, the hour just before sunset, very beautiful golden light. Your costume just looks beautiful. That's the real, they're BSing me, But I've actually learned about the golden hour. And if you look tonight, I'm sure there'll be a lovely sunset. You just look how the light, mainly because of pollution, obviously, it just looks beautiful. Everything looks nice at that time. So I shut up. And you just have to learn to garner your energy during the day.
And from that desert to the desert in Tunisia, did you return to the site of the Lars homestead for episode 2?
Yes, indeed. And that was so strange because George and I were the only people on that film who'd ever been to that location before. The hole in the ground where Luke stands with one leg up and he calls down to Aunt Beru, the original hole, which has nothing in it, because the inside of the hole is actually about 50 miles away in Matmata. That was still there, so they could orientate the rest of the set that had been there originally to that hole, and it was an extraordinary time lapse. It was like time travel. I stood, knowing I'd stood on this sand before, not the same cranes, we assume, hard to tell, didn't count them, didn't mark any of them, and I said to George, this is. It turned my soul over a little, to be followed shortly after on another movie, I can't remember, where he and I again walked into the white corridor of the 24 for the last movie.
Episode 3.
And again, he and I were the only people who'd been in that. Nobody else there. They'd only seen it on movies and had rebuilt it from what they'd seen. And again, it was eerily the same. And yet there I was, 25 years older and 25 years, I was going to say more grown up, but I don't quite mean that. More mature. No, I don't even mean that. Older, yeah.
There you go.
So that was a bit of a few people get to do that, have that experience. It's, I suppose, almost like returning to your school again or something. But because Star Wars has been such a huge part of not only my life but the world's life, some of these iconic moments, if you like, do take on a huge dynamic.
Yes. And when you were making the trek out to that set in Tunisia, in the middle of the desert, for the prequels, were you saying to yourself, I can't believe I'm doing this again? Didn't it just seem like a once in a lifetime experience? It's not Artoo.
No, I told him I was busy.
He'll probably call back.
I'll see him later. Yeah.
But I mean, did you say to yourself, I can't believe here we go again, 30 years later?
I think the phrase, here we go, yes, here we go again. Isn't that in the movie? I say it.
Return of the Jedi.
One of my lines.
Return of the Jedi.
Here we go again. Yeah. That terrible doomed quality. At least they'd improved the accommodation in Tunisia. But what was scary was that in the original film, the little domed home, you could not stand down there. It was full of water because the water table was only about 3 feet, 4 feet below the surface. Now, with the growth in hotel and the use of water resources and sewerage and all that kind of thing, we could... Artoo. Later. You could actually... We stood down there. There was about a 6 foot, 7 foot ability. And it showed me just what water management, how water levels are falling because of what we're doing. And you should have seen the mound of water bottles, which they did recycle. But we all carried. Most of us had special, hip containers because you needed to hydrate.
Yes.
And actually, it's the one time that I did completely get what do you call it when you get really hot? Cross is one word. I got heat stroke. Ooh. Because I was in that hole in the ground. And it was hot outside. It was hotter inside. And hotter inside my costume. And Don Bees was talking to me. And I could hear him talking to me. And I could hear words. I didn't understand them, and he doesn't have a speech defect. And I said, and he took the head off. And, I cooled down and whatever. Very frightening.
Well, I'm going to take a drink of water right now, just hearing that. Very important to hydrate yourself in the desert or not. What about working with Alec Guinness?
Favorite. Absolutely favorite. We talked about George being in charge of the whole movie, and that means he doesn't always have time to talk to individuals about the details. He hires people to do their job, otherwise he'd do it himself, and he doesn't have time. So Alec sort of in my mind at least, slightly took over being my mentor and my encourager and my support, if you like. And I have lots of very nice memories about him. And occasionally I would go and stay with him and his wife, Merila, who, she was out there on the first film. She was sketching. She had an experience. She came back to that. Some guard had come up, some like deranged policeman, had tried to arrest her in the middle of nowhere for sketching a temple, which you're not allowed to do apparently.
Yes.
But he got awfully carried away, and so she gave him the picture, which he'd been sketching. And because she was a very, very bright, intelligent woman, she failed to show him the rest of the book, which was filled with pictures of temples.
I'll bet.
Sketching it. So she was fine. Yeah, he was wonderful to me, and obviously a great sort of person to have in the movie.
Yes.
And maybe that's why everybody else could cope with all the silliness of talking about hyperdrives and stuff, because he said it with great reality. So we kind of followed his example.
Well, it kind of tests your mettle as an actor when you're saying things that you really don't know what you're saying.
Yes, a lot of actors do that in ordinary films. They actors don't always know what they're talking about. They just pretend.
I believe it. Now let's fast forward to the future. You're still involved with Star Wars. You're involved with the upcoming Clone Wars show. What can you tell us about that?
Well, I got my knuckles wrapped the other day by putting on my website that I just, on my little greetings page, I just said I've just done episode 5 of Clone Wars called, I don't know, Knuckles in Space or something. And immediately from Lucasfilm, take the name off the website. It's like... And I have to say, why? It's like, who cares? It's...
they've always been very concerned with how they reveal things and keeping things quiet.
It gets a little tiresome sometimes.
Yeah, it does. It does, as a fan, it gets tiresome.
Yes, it's faintly insulting. Certainly they have a product that they do and need to maintain and... keep the standard up, but sometimes they can get a bit hysterical and over-precious, and maybe their fans might want to name it first.
Right.
Please.
Right. That's always the big fear. Now, have you seen any footage of the show?
Very, very brief, because you have to imagine I am recording them in London, me and an engineer, and just as when I was recording the Museum of Science and Industry's phone message on hold, if you ring up to book seats, or tickets rather, for the Science and Imagination exhibit, you get about 5 or 6 minutes, if not more, of Threepio explaining, first of all, that there isn't a human there at the moment, but, hang on, etc., how you can book tickets. And then Artoo gets irritable and bored and wanders off around the museum and stuff. And so I'm recording that in London, and everybody is in Chicago. And the engineer just said to me sort of privately off air, how come, there's 5 of them and just 2 of us? And that's the way it is with the cartoons, that, there's a whole production team over there talking to me through my headset and giving me direction, which is very, very useful. One needs direction. And, of course, I do it at about, 4 in the afternoon when it's, almost, 8 in the morning there. So at least I get my own back that way.
Man, you're up. You're ready to go. Now,
and I'm really enjoying them, actually. It's fun. And the big secret is I shouldn't reveal, but I don't actually wear the costume in the studio.
Oh, there you go.
Easier.
Well, I'll tell you, if you're ever in Chicago and they need you to record some lines, you know which studio to come to. I'll take care of you.
Yeah.
No problem. Now, everyone's looking forward to it. There's also another Star Wars TV series on the horizon, down the line a little bit. It's a live-action show. Have you been contacted about being involved in that or anything?
Pretty much everything. It is quite a way in the future, and everything on that is sort of under wraps. There's only so rude I can get about the whole secrecy thing. So, there is plenty of stuff in the pipeline, because there is a huge adoration of the shows. This 30th year, I don't know if people listening were in London or in Los Angeles, but I think they will have got a huge collective feeling about how people feel about Star Wars. And, there's, like anything, good, bad, and indifferent. It's up to you to choose what you like. Some people choose everything. That's faintly indiscriminate, but, I like people to be thoughtful and selective. You don't have to like it all, but Providing somebody likes something, that's good.
You're talking about Star Wars fans. Your relationship with Star Wars fans is pretty solid. You've been known to go out at Star Wars Celebration and work the lines. People wait and they'll get in line to see it, and they'll turn around and Anthony Daniels is tapping them on the shoulder. We've heard these stories over and over and over again. How is that relationship with the fans?
This year I have done quite a number of, well, a few appearances, and I don't normally do very many. I slightly worry that one risks trivializing the largeness of Star Wars by sort of turning up at a church hall every weekend to sign endless autographs. So it's not my thing. The idea, I find standing in line so appalling that I feel sorry for people I feel, not sorry, but I feel an empathy with people who are standing there for 3 hours. And if there's anything I can do to alleviate that, my big problem is airports and that kind of line at the moment. So I do kind of guess how they're feeling. And also, I quite like breaking the barrier between the screen and the audience and saying, well, I'm a real person and you're a real person, and, providing you're not too weird or don't smell too bad, let's talk for a minute. And I like playing tricks on people and joking and all that kind of thing.
Yes.
Because Threepio is, very uptight, very correct. And I'm slightly less so. So it's the naughty side to me that comes out.
That's nice. And how was Celebration 4 in L.A. for you?
That's a tricky one because I just was standing there for so long. Every time I looked up, the line seemed to get longer, and sort of that's all I did. I did actually go to bed for 2 days afterwards, and I found it a very intense experience, maybe too intense. But I found, practically all of the people. There weren't one or two people who were inappropriate, but that's always when you have that many thousand people. There'll always be one or two. People who really shouldn't be let out.
Of course.
And the sad thing is that lets down the other fans. But I'll admit something that, to begin with, the first person came out and said, Mr. Daniels, you've really changed my childhood and all that kind of thing. And I was saying that's very nice and all that kind of thing. The 20th person that says, Mr. Daniels, yeah, thanks, great. And then something in my brain said, that was so wrong and rude because I have wanted to say to people that I've met that are famous or have done something that I admire, I want to tell you how much I appreciate it. And it's necessary. I think you have to have this sort of stroke thing to make a complete picture, an entity, and it's very nice to be told. British people are notorious for not accepting compliments. They say, no, not at all. It was nothing. It didn't mean anything. That's a bad habit, but it is very British. But I'm trying to break it. So if you'd like to pay me a compliment now.
Well, I'll tell you right now. I saw Star Wars the first time when I was 8 years old. It was 1977. My dad took me to the movie theater. We got there late. The scene we arrived in was when Threepio was being lowered into the oil bath. That's my day. It feels
so good.
Yes. What can you tell us about that scene? What do you remember about shooting that scene?
I remember very clearly. It was a very cold day in London, and in Elstree, just north of London. And yes, I was a little nervous of the device that lowered me into the water. It was a little lift, and I'd seen one or two of the effects go slightly wrong. So I was a little nervous that there I was, about to be deluged into a pit of vegetable oil. I had got them to warm the vegetable oil, which they'd done. Not by, you could see it steaming, couldn't you? If you think back to that steam.
Sure.
Yeah. That was actually 2 electric kettles behind me, behind the scenery. It had nothing to do with the contents of the oil.
High tech.
And you see, I love that kind of trickery because you could do that at home. Mm-hmm. If you do it at home, boys and girls, be very careful. Boiling water can be hot.
That's why they say it's boiling.
Yeah, but it's the sort of rubbish you get on a cup of coffee now. If it's not hot, I'm taking it back.
Is that the only time that Threepio was submerged with you in the costume?
I think it's the only time he's submerged totally.
At all?
Right, yeah.
And
yes. Yeah, that's the only time.
And did that cause a problem with the way the costume fit?
Oh, totally. It fell apart because a lot of it was held together with kind of sticky tape, either gold or just sticky. And the oil actually removed the stickiness. And if you look carefully, the left leg has absolutely fallen, is about to totally fall off. It just slid down, it's kind of dark and it goes by in a flash, but in a still you can see it, because the costume was kind of a little homemade.
Well, you're giving me some freeze frame moments here with these movies. I've seen each one of them 100 times.
Okay, you want a freeze frame? Go a couple of shots forward. And I got an email to the website the other day, which I haven't yet had time to answer. Like when Artoo pops out a picture of Carrie Fisher, you seem to fall off onto the floor. George said, I need you kind of on the floor. So it would have been very difficult to step off. Mm-hmm. So, I said, well, I'll just pop off. And I did. That's why I'm down there, to be on the same, so I'd be in the same relationship with Artoo in a close-up.
Right.
But if you want a freeze frame, you just watch what Threepio does with the towel. I say no more. Okay. Luke Skywalker gives him the towel to dry himself with, and I wasn't quite clear where I was drying.
I got you. Okay, another freeze frame moment. That's 3 of them. And I haven't even heard of any of these before. Have you seen, do you see Star Wars parodies? And have you seen the new Family Guy Star Wars episode?
No.
Okay. They'll probably be rerunning it a lot, but the reason I asked you is because I thought a lot of the humor was lowbrow, and I just was wondering if you felt it would be, if that's appropriate to have like sort of scatological humor in the Star Wars universe.
My sense of humor is entirely lowbrow, entirely scatological. So I think I should get a tape of this program. The Disney, I will tell you, they persuaded me to do a Star Wars weekend. Mm-hmm. And I actually had fun. But at one time I used the word, such bullshit or something. Well, oh my God, Mickey Mouse had to have his ears syringed. Oh, the drama. If you occasionally, using a word or a phrase can shock, quite deliberately, not malevolently, but for dramatic effect. And I will go on doing that. One has to be very careful on live TV because TV is in your home. You've not really made a choice about what you say there. And I don't mean to offend, but I mean not to be pious all the time. That can be awfully tedious. And I think in both countries, America and England, there can be just too much niceness sometimes. I mean, kids have got to get real. The language they use in schools is appalling. They wouldn't use it at home, and one should have standards. But just occasionally, people running to their dictionaries to look up the meaning of scatological. Sometimes the odd bit of rudeness is quite useful and quite funny. And, it makes people laugh, and I like making people laugh. Well, and one of the joys about, for instance, being at Disney, where I'm on stage, or even what do we call them, a celebration? I actually not crazy about that word. Is getting a reaction from audiences as myself, with particularly either as myself or as reference to Threepio, because they almost know more about him than I do. Mm-hmm. They probably watch these movies more than I do. Mm-hmm. And there's a common language that we share, which is lovely.
And when it's all said and done, what do you value the most out of your experiences being in Star Wars?
Gosh. Wow.
It's kind of a broad question.
A broad question. I think there are a number of things I value. Probably it is having Threepio as my best friend.
That comes across, obviously. You do... portraying Threepio in so many different things, in the Muppet Show, at the Oscars, the radio dramas, you obviously feel a certain ownership of that role.
Don't tell George, he'd be furious.
Of course.
George owns it, owns the image, if you like, but somehow maybe Threepio's soul belongs to me, I don't know. It's a nice thought. Not all the time, of course.
You did have a lot to do with the actual creation of the character, who was supposed to sound like a used car salesman from New York.
Yeah, I think the trouble was I couldn't do a used car salesman voice. George never mentioned that. He kind of got busy, left it to me. So yes, read all about it on the site. I think, I will emphasize that, yes. I think the best thing to come out of it for me is Threepio.
And everyone, I mean, you wanted to compliment my childhood. The most important things to me were sports and Star Wars. And before Star Wars, I didn't have any sort of pop culture thing that I could bond with other children. And I mean, we had our comic books and whatnot, but Star Wars really brought a lot of kids together and helped us bond. And to this day, here we are 30 years later, I have 2 boys, 8 and 4, and I bond with them over Star Wars. So if that's what you have done and what George has done and the whole Star Wars, the whole crazy thing, if it's done anything, it brings people together.
Very much so. And sometimes in line, I see people standing in line for through whatever hours for an autograph, and I go up to them and say, by the time you get to me, I want you to have made friends with the person next to you in line. Do you know each other? No. Well, by the time you get there, you will. And I love that. And I think it goes beyond the movies. And, you know, I'm not talking about extremist groups who meet in the woods every Saturday and, you know, put grease paint on. I'm talking about people who share a love for something that's actually very innocent.
Yes. Yes. And it's Star Wars, Where Science Meets Imagination at the Chicago Museum of Science and Industry, running through January 6th. I look forward to seeing you. We have a mutual friend who will be in town, and I hope to bring him with on Friday morning for the opening, Dan Madsen.
How wonderful.
Yes.
Are you serious?
Yes, Dan will be in town.
Wow, this is a genuine surprise. Wow. This is your life moment. Dan Madsen, who put on the first Star Wars celebration in Denver, I'm surprised the Ark didn't turn up with Noah, because I have seen it rain a lot, but never quite so consistently. Yes. Oh, you know, and people who were out there listening now who were at Celebration. It was called Celebration because it was the only one, like Star Wars, the original. And the people there were so patient and so devoted. And I have enormous affection for that occasion and for those fans. And for Dan, who soldiered on, just did it. He couldn't do anything about the weather. It made life very difficult. He was one of the best people ever to work for Lucasfilm. And he now does, you know, other things, other projects with other movies. And I'm just thrilled he's going to be here.
Yes.
I didn't know. How come he didn't? He never writes, he never emails. He's coming to the museum on Friday. This is very interesting for you people at home. I'd be can you make sure you get there reasonably early in the morning?
Yes. I'll
along
do
with anybody
I can.
else. If you're listening to this, why don't you come on down? And I will be standing somewhere near my costume, I would imagine, possibly doing some TV interviews, which is always crazy at these events because it's like doing an interview in a bus station. The noise is and I'm trying to think what I'm talking about and whatever, you know. So. Yes. But it would be grand to see him. He was a major part of the beginning of the fan club for Star Wars, and it's very important to remember that he is, you know, the bedrock of it.
Well, thank you so much. You've been so generous with your time. It's been a thrill for me just to meet you, much less be able to talk to you for so long. You know, continued future success with Star Wars and everything else.
So in a very un-English way, I'm just going to say thank you very much for saying those nice things.
You're very welcome.
Much appreciated.
Oh, thank goodness you're here. Artoo and I have been waiting to tell you all about Star Wars, where science meets imagination. And why not join us at the Museum of Science and Industry on our opening day, Friday, October 5th. Oh, my.
Rebel Force Radio.
Your source for the Force.